On my 63rd birthday, my son took me out to the countryside and left me by an old, run-down shack, saying, "This is your gift, you live here now." He drove away, leaving me deep in the wilderness, but he could not have guessed who was living next door, a neighbor who was already coming over to offer help. Hello, dear listeners. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and click the like button. I always love reading where you're listening from, so feel free to leave a comment. Now get comfortable and enjoy the story. Until recently, I believe my life hadn't had many events big enough for a long story. I always lived quietly, blending into the background. Even in my own condo, which my late husband Paul and I purchased many years ago, I gradually became like a shadow, an invisible presence, like a piece of furniture that takes up space but is no longer noticed. For the past 10 years, that condo didn't really feel like my own. It was part of the busy life of my son Darren and his wife Tiffany. I took the smallest room, which used to be a closet for storage. My books, Paul's photographs, and the old armchair where he used to read the paper all gradually moved in there, making room for the modern, bright, and empty space that Tiffany loved so much. I didn't argue. Why waste time? The most important thing was for my son to be happy. Every morning began the same way for me. I woke up before everyone else at 6 o'clock, careful not to make any noise or disturb their sleep. I quietly went into the kitchen, started preparing the grits for Darren, and brewed two different teas. A strong black tea for him and a special herbal blend with petals and imported herbs for Tiffany, a mixture that always made my own throat feel itchy. I brewed a simple black tea for myself and drank it quietly in my room, keeping out of sight. My social security check was deposited directly into the joint checking account. "Mama, why do you need money?" Darren would ask shyly, avoiding my eyes. "We always buy everything together, so I would agree." Why? My clothes were all hand-me-downs that looked worn out, and I hardly went out, only to the grocery store or pharmacy. All my hopes had long faded away, shrinking down to one simple wish. Seeing my son happy, I remember once giving him all my savings, money I had been saving for cataract surgery, when Tiffany suddenly needed a new designer handbag. "Mommy, you understand?" she asked softly, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "Darren's colleagues are all so successful at work. I feel I need to keep up. It's important for his career." Darren nodded kindly, looking at me with gratitude, so I handed over the money. Later, I just started buying stronger reading glasses. My opinion didn't seem to carry any weight in the house. If I said the soup was too salty, Tiffany would purse her lips and say, "Mama, you're getting older. Your taste buds aren't what they used to be." If I tried to offer my son advice based on my life experiences, he would gently interrupt, saying, Mama, things are different now. We'll figure it out ourselves." They did. And I was mainly a helper, cooking, keeping the house, acting as an interest-free ATM, an invisible woman whose presence was useful but not essential. Sometimes in the evenings, I'd sit in my armchair and look at Paul's photo, asking myself, "Paul, did we raise our son right? He's a good boy, isn't he? That's just how life is now." In the picture, my husband remained silent, and I convinced myself I was doing what was best. After all, a mother should sacrifice herself for her child, shouldn't she? My 63rd birthday came just like any other day. As always, I didn't expect anything special. Maybe a small bouquet of daisies, which I loved, or a box of my favorite dark gourmet chocolate. In the morning, Tiffany was surprisingly warm and affectionate. She even hugged me and chirped, "Happy birthday, Mommy." "Darren and I have a wonderful surprise for you. I think you'll be amazed." I have to admit, I felt myself soften. Something warm and comforting awakened inside me, a forgotten sense of childhood excitement in anticipation of a miracle. Darren, unusually nervous himself, kept glancing at his watch. "Get ready, Mama," he said softly. "We're about to pick up your gift." I put on my best dress, the only one still in decent shape, a simple gingham with small floral patterns. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was an elderly woman with tired eyes that for this moment looked surprisingly happy. We got into the car. Tiffany stayed home, saying she had a headache. You two go ahead without me, she waved. You can tell me everything later. We drove for quite some time. The city streets gradually gave way to suburban roads. Soon we reached dull fields and woods. I tried to ask Darren where we were headed, but he answered shortly, avoiding my gaze. It's a surprise, Mama, you'll see. I fell silent, gazing out the window as my anxiety grew. This road didn't lead to a resort, a spa, or any place where someone might celebrate a birthday. It was heading deep into the wilderness. At last, we turned onto a rough dirt track. The car jostled so violently that my teeth rattled. All around, there were abandoned fields, overgrown with weeds and crooked utility poles. Then a village came into view, or rather, what was left of it. A few houses had sunken into the ground, their surfaces darkened by time. Not one of them seemed inhabited. Darren pressed the brake and stopped right beside the nastiest looking building. It wasn't even a house, more like a shack, with a roof sagging and windows boarded up with planks. Tall weeds surrounded it, as high as a man, and the fence was broken and rotten. We're here, he said flatly, shutting off the engine. I stayed silent, confused. I couldn't understand. It just didn't add up. It had to be a mistake or perhaps a cruel joke. Darren stepped out, opened the trunk, and took out my old canvas bag, the one I used for weekend trips 20 years ago. He carried a change of clothes, a robe, and a bar of soap. He placed the bag on the ground beside a cluster of bushes. There you go, Mama. He motioned with his hand toward the wreckage. This is your gift. Tiffany and I have bought you a house, your own place with fresh air. You will live there. It will be good for you. The words fell into the heavy silence like stones dropping into a deep well. I looked at him, my son, and didn't recognize him. His face felt unfamiliar. His eyes was unfocused and dull. There was no anger in his gaze, no pity, only weariness and irritation. Darren, I whispered, my voice trembling. What is this? Why? Mama, please don't start. He grimaced. We thought this would be best for everyone. You need a break from the busy city, and we need some space of our own. Tiffany's pregnant. He threw out the last words like a secret weapon, an excuse for everything. He didn't even look at me. He was in a hurry. He got into the car and slammed the door shut. I stood on the road, watching him through the windshield. He started the engine, and at that very moment, when the engine roared and broke the quiet of the countryside, something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger, pain, or despair. It was something else. It was as if deep within my chest, where warm and forgiving love had always lived, a loud, clear sound echoed, like a metal key turning in a rusty lock. Click. And instead of warmth, there was cold, a sharp, pure ice. The car moved, kicking up a cloud of dust. I didn't cry. I didn't shout after him. I simply watched as the silver side of his imported sedan grew smaller, turned into a tiny dot, then disappeared around the bend. The dust slowly settled. The smell of gasoline faded away. All that was left was me, my old bag, and an abandoned house on the outskirts of a deserted town. And complete silence. In that silence, for the first time in many years, I heard myself. Not the mother, not the mother-in-law, not the hired help, but myself, Evelyn Reed. And this Evelyn spoke to me in a very calm, very clear voice. That's it, enough. I understood that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and that no one would take my life from me anymore. I would take it back myself. The dust stirred up by my son's car slowly settled onto the tall weeds along the roadside. I stood still, listening to the quiet fading engine in the distance. When that sound disappeared too, a silence settled over me. One I hadn't experienced since I was a child visiting my grandmother in the countryside. But that silence had once been alive, filled with the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. Now it felt dead and heavy. I slowly turned and looked at the old gift. It was a wooden shack, darkened by weather and time, with boarded up windows. The porch was sagging to one side. One of the steps had fallen away, revealing last year's damp, decayed leaves inside the hole. Around the house was a chaos of weeds, with wild raspberry vines tangled with bindweed. It looked completely abandoned, a place forgotten by everyone, a place where I had been brought only to be left behind. Tears welled up. No. Inside, I was as dry as a desert. That cold ache in my chest had frozen every feeling that might have burst out in tears. Despair lingered somewhere in the past, in the memory of the car that had taken my son away. Here on this deserted land, the only things remaining were me and a sharp, clear thought in my mind. I moved toward the porch, automatically stepping around a rotten plank, and placed my bag on the edge that was still intact. My eyes briefly took in this scene of ruin, but my mind was already elsewhere, thinking about my bright, tidy three-bedroom condo on Peachtree Road, the very place where Tiffany was probably deciding what color curtains to hang in my old room. My was the key word. The forlorn and neglected appearance of this damaged house made me think of something I had tried not to remember all these years, just to avoid tempting fate. I recalled the words of my late husband, Paul. We were sitting in that same kitchen 10 years before he died, and he, with a serious and unusually stern look, placed some papers in front of me. Evie, he said then, looking directly into my eyes, I'm going to see the attorney tomorrow and transfer my share completely to you so you will be the sole owner. I waved my hands, asking why, Paul. We are a family. We have a son. But he shook his head. A son is one thing, but life can change. Anything can happen. You are all I have, and I need to make sure you will always have a roof over your head, yours and no one else's. I didn't think much about it at the time, but I obeyed his wishes. After his passing, all those documents were filed in my name, Evelyn Reed, as the sole and rightful owner. Darren didn't know about this. He believed the condo was a shared inheritance that would naturally be passed on to him someday. I never corrected that idea. Why would I? It seemed small-minded, a lack of faith in my own son, and how wrong I was. Then there was another memory that felt even more significant. About 5 years ago, I received notice of an inheritance. A third cousin of mine from Birmingham, Alabama, whom I had only seen once in my childhood, had died. She was alone and had no children, so she left me her small one-bedroom apartment. I went there, took care of all the paperwork, sold the apartment quickly to the first interested buyers, and put the entire proceeds into a separate savings account at the bank. I didn't tell Darren or Tiffany anything about it. At that time, they were taking out a large loan for a new car. I understood what would happen if they found out about my savings. It wouldn't be stolen. No, it would simply be absorbed into pressing needs, into concerns about status, into worries about the future, just as my retirement income, my old savings, and my health had been swallowed up. I kept quiet, not out of greed, but because of an instinct for self-preservation that I believed had long since faded within me. This account was my secret safeguard, my last line of protection that no one else knew about. These thoughts raced through my mind, not as vague images, but as clear, definite facts. It was as if someone had turned on a light in a dark closet, revealing all the tools I possessed. I reached into my bag. Darren must have packed it quickly. An old terry cloth robe, slippers, towels, and a bar of laundry soap. And at the very bottom, among these simple possessions, lay my salvation, an old flip phone that Tiffany disdainfully called a gramophone. They had bought it for me a few years earlier so I could stay connected. The simplest model, no internet, no extra features. They had no idea that the device's memory stored the numbers that at this moment were the most precious thing to me. I pressed the power button. The battery was nearly full. I always kept it charged out of habit, but the screen showed no network signal. My heart, which had been beating steadily and coldly until now, fluttered for a moment. Was it all in vain? I looked around. The town was nestled in a valley, and I needed to get to a higher point. Without hesitation, I followed a path overgrown with plants, heading away from the house and up the side of a small hill. My feet caught on thistles, and branches brushed against my face, but I didn't notice. I kept walking, staring at the phone screen as if it were a compass. Finally, at the very top of the hill, where a lonely crooked cedar tree stood, two faint signal bars appeared. That was enough. I found the number for Mr. Harrison in the phone book. Bank, Mr. Harrison. He was the branch manager, the same age as my Paul. He had known me since the time my husband and I first opened a savings account together. I picked up the phone and pressed call. The ring seemed to go on forever. Hello. A familiar, slightly tired voice answered, "Mr. Harrison, hello. This is Evelyn Reed." My voice was calm and steady, with no sign of nerves. I was surprised at how composed I sounded. "Evelyn, good afternoon. How can I assist you?" His voice revealed his surprise. I hadn't contacted him in years. "Mr. Harrison, I need you to do a few urgent things right now, if possible. I'm listening. First, please immediately cancel all powers of attorney and revoke access to my accounts that are in my son, Darren Reed's name. Everything without exception." There was a pause on the line. "Are you sure, Evelyn?" "Absolutely," I interrupted. "Second, I want you to immediately redirect all my retirement deposits, which go into the joint account, to my personal savings account I opened 5 years ago. Do you remember?" "Yes, of course I remember. It will be taken care of. And third, I will completely block his access to view the balances of all my accounts. Total financial independence. From this moment, every transaction on my accounts must have my personal approval." "Personal," I emphasized. "I understand, Evelyn. Everything will be done within an hour." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Goodbye." I ended the call. The first part of the plan was now in motion. Next, I needed to move on to the second step. I found another contact number. Marcus Jones, attorney. He had previously assisted me with the inheritance papers for my cousin. A young, smart, and meticulous lawyer. He responded almost immediately. "Marcus Jones, attorney at law." "Marcus. Hello. This is Evelyn Reed. We had worked together on the Birmingham apartment. Of course, Mrs. Reed, I remember you." "Hello. Is something wrong?" I asked calmly. "Yes, something has happened," I responded. "I need your help. It concerns my condo on Peachtree Road. I need to officially establish my sole ownership and prepare the necessary documents to prevent any claims from third parties, including my son." The lawyer paused for a moment, taking in the information. "I understand you want to fully protect your property. That's a wise decision. Please email me a copy of your ID and the property deeds, and I will begin the process. If needed, I will prepare an official cease and desist notice. I am unable to send anything at the moment as I am out of town and do not have the documents with me. They are all in the condo. However, could you start by reaching out to the County Register of Deeds and obtaining all the relevant files?" "Yes, I can do that right away. You can rely on me, Mrs. Reed." "I appreciate that, and I am counting on you. Thank you." I lowered the phone. The cold in my chest hadn't gone away, but now it felt different. It wasn't the shock's coldness. It was the cold of steel, the cold of a tool ready for action. I turned and walked back down the hill toward the house. And now everything looked different. It no longer felt like a grave to me. Instead, it seemed like a temporary shelter, a quiet, hidden place where I would quietly carry out my silent struggle. At this moment, I was aware that inside my condo, in the living room, my son and his wife were probably enjoying champagne, celebrating how cleverly they had managed everything. "We finally got rid of the old lady," Tiffany would be saying, taking a sip. "Now we can begin the renovation and live like real people." They were celebrating their victory, unaware that they had just lost a war without even realizing it had started. I stood at the doorway of my new temporary sanctuary. For the first time in years, I took a deep breath, and although the air smelled of dampness and decay, it felt clean to me. It was the air of freedom. For those first few hours, I simply sat on the tall, surprisingly sturdy porch and looked out at the overgrown yard. The sun was setting, casting soft watercolor shades across the sky. The air was dense with the scent of rotting leaves, damp earth, and something else, something wild and unfamiliar. The city doesn't carry that smell. The city's air is full of gasoline, dust, and the hurried footsteps of others. Here, time seemed to pause, frozen along with this abandoned town. When darkness fully fell and the cold began to creep under my gingham dress, I realized I needed to move. Sitting on the porch wouldn't warm me up or help quench my thirst. The cold settling deep in my chest was internal. It gave me strength, yet my body kept its own demands. I carefully felt my way across the wooden floorboards and stepped inside the house. Inside, the air was even thicker. Dust, mouse droppings, and old compressed wood filled the space. The atmosphere was heavy and still. Slim rays of moonlight poured through the cracks in the boarded up windows, creating strange patterns on the floor. I took my old phone out of my bag and switched on the flashlight. The faint beam revealed a potbelly stove with chipped tiles, a table covered in a thick layer of gray dust, and an overturned stool. I felt no fear, only a curious sense of businesslike calm. It was as if I was taking over from the previous owner, who had been very neglectful. I moved through the rooms. There were two. One contained a sagging iron bed with a rusty spring, while the other was empty, with only some rags gathered in the corner. The floor creaked with every step, yet it felt solid. The house was old, but clearly built to last. It hadn't crumbled. It had merely fallen into sleep. My first priority was water. I stepped outside with a flashlight, scanning the property, and then I saw a miracle. Behind the house, amid a tangle of nettles, there was an old well with a darkened frame and a heavy oak windlass. The chain was rusty, but still intact. I struggled to turn the handle. It squeaked and groaned, but eventually the chain lowered. A minute later, I heard a faint splash. Water. There was water. This was my first small victory. I found an old galvanized bucket on the porch, surprisingly free of rust, and after several tries managed to lift it full to the brim. The water was icy and carried the smell of silt, but it was clear. I carried the bucket into the house, feeling the muscles in my back ache from the unfamiliar effort. I spent the next 2 days working without thinking of Darren or Tiffany. My world had shrunk to just this house and yard. I found an old saw and an axe in the shed, cut off dry branches from a fallen apple tree, and started a fire in the stove. Smoke initially drifted into the room, but soon the chimney warmed up, and the steady draft roared, filling the house with a gentle living warmth. I found some old newspapers and rags and used them to scrub the table and the floor of one room. The wash water turned black. I gathered dry straw from the shed and filled an old mattress I found in the attic with it, making the sleeping surface softer. I lived like Robinson Crusoe, and this simple physical work helped clear my mind. Every evening, I would climb my hill to catch the signal and simply watch the screen. 2 bars, my connection to the world. I didn't make any calls, I just waited. I knew they would call me. It happened on the third day. As evening was approaching, I was sitting on the porch, finishing a cup of herbal tea made from currant leaves I had found in the yard when the phone suddenly rang loudly and jarringly, breaking the evening quiet. Darren's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring a few more times before picking up. Inside, I felt completely at ease. Yes, I answered. Mama, finally, where have you been? I've been trying to call for an hour. His voice carried that familiar tone of irritated condescension. I haven't been walking, Darren. I've been simply breathing the air. There is quite a bit of it here, I replied softly. Okay, so how are you adjusting? He asked in the tone of someone performing a task they consider unpleasant, but necessary. I'm settling in gradually. Thanks for checking. He completely missed my quiet irony. Listen, Mama, something happened. Tiffany's card wouldn't work at the store. The supplementary one, there's definitely money in it. I checked this morning. You didn't accidentally press something, did you? Maybe a glitch at the bank. Call them, okay? There it was, the first small ripple in the calm of their complacency. I stayed silent, letting him speak. You need to call and tell them everything's okay. Tiffany's upset. She wanted to buy a dress. I pictured the scene. My daughter-in-law in a luxury boutique handing over my debit card, which has faithfully received my retirement funds, only to see the word declined on the terminal. Her surprise then, her indignation. How dare it? The old lady's story was not convincing. Mama, are you listening? Darren hurried me. I hear you, I replied quietly. Then I noticed him seemingly covering the phone with his hand, though not very carefully, saying to someone nearby, I don't know. She's silent, just sitting there. I could hear Tiffany's voice, sharp and clear as breaking glass. I would recognize it anywhere, full of contempt with a hissing sound. Why are you even talking to her? She's just putting on a show, trying to act tough now that she's older. Did we hurt her feelings? She'll sit out in the middle of nowhere without a penny, and she'll come running back to Silk in no time. She'll call us herself. Just tell her not to be foolish. Tell her to go fix it. I need that dress. Then Darren's voice returned, softer and coaxing. Tiff, wait. But she raised her voice again. What? Wait. The man coming for the kitchen estimate is arriving tomorrow, and we haven't paid the property tax. I got a message today about the debt. Did she also turn that off from her grandma's phone? I can see the signs of senility creeping in. We shouldn't have bought her a house. We should have been searching for a nursing home instead. Dementia, a show, sitting without a dime. Those words didn't hurt me. They were a clear, final diagnosis. They confirmed everything I'd already understood that day. Darren left me on that road. To them, I wasn't a person or a mother. I was an object, a function, an inconvenient, aging piece of furniture that suddenly started to malfunction. And they weren't trying to fix it. They were just angry that it had stopped working properly. All that tiny hope I had hidden deep inside my soul, hope that maybe I was being too harsh, that I had overreacted, vanished in that moment. The ice in my chest grew colder than granite. The rustling sound of the phone returned, and Darren's voice grew loud again, directed at me. Mama, are you there? So will you call the bank? I took a deep breath. The air was cool and fresh. No, Darren, I said softly but clearly. What? No, you can't or you won't. His voice reflected disbelief. Figure it out yourselves, I told him, then pressed the end call button. I set the phone down and looked for a long time at the darkening yard. I was no longer angry. Only a cold, steady sense of righteousness remained. They had judged themselves. They spoke the truth about their actions. They believed this was just my small, foolish act, my harmless show. They couldn't imagine that it was not in performance. It was the final act, and it was happening right now. The days merged into one long, meaningful effort. I no longer kept track of whether it was the fourth or fifth day. What did it matter? Here in this silent quiet, time was measured not by the dates on a calendar, but by the tasks I completed. The floor had been swept. The bucket of clean water was nearby, and I had just begun to light the stove for the first time. The gentle, familiar smell of warmth and smoke filled the house, bringing back a forgotten coziness. My anger, that cold, distant anger born on the dusty road, had found a place to settle. It hadn't disappeared. No, it had simply sunk deep into my soul like a heavy frost, becoming a part of my foundation. I no longer thought about Darren and Tiffany. Instead, my mind turned inward. It felt like a strange and unfamiliar task. On the second day, I decided to check the attic. I climbed the shaky makeshift ladder, expecting only to find old junk and cobwebs. And as I imagined, that's what I saw. But in the farthest corner, hidden under a pile of old sacks, I discovered a small wooden chest that was not locked. I brushed the dust from it. The dust immediately swirled in a sunbeam, shining through a hole in the roof and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, on yellowed fabric, lay neat stacks of letters tied with twine and a thick album with a velvet cover. I brought it downstairs, sat on the porch, and opened it. The faces of people long gone looked up at me. Serious men in uniforms, women in simple headscarves, round-faced children, weddings, military send-offs, simple photos in a field. An entire life lived in this house stared at me from the faded photographs. I didn't know these people, but for some reason I felt a strange kinship with them. They too had lived, worked, loved, and raised children on this land. I turned the pages and thought about my own album, the one left behind in the city, the thick blue one with photos of Paul and me, our wedding, Darren's birth, his first day of school, college. Here we are all together by the ocean. Darren is still just a boy building a sandcastle. And here are Paul and I alone in the park a year before he passed. My condo wasn't just walls and square footage. It was an album too, a safe place where my memories lived. Every cup, every book on the shelf, every scratch on the floor. Each one was a part of my story. The thought that outsiders, strangers to my soul, now had control over them hurt more than any blame could. I realized I wasn't fighting just over property. I was standing up for my history, for my right to remember. With these thoughts in mind, as I often did in the evening, I climbed up to my communication station. I decided to call my lawyer, Marcus Jones, to check if there was any update. I didn't hold much hope. I knew these cases rarely got resolved quickly, but I needed to hear that progress was being made. He answered right away, almost as if he'd been waiting for my call, but his tone was different, no longer cheerful. It was tense. Mrs. Reed, good evening. I'm glad you reached out. I was just about to look for you. Is something wrong, Marcus? I asked, feeling my heartbeat pick up sharply, a sign of my growing anxiety. He chose his words carefully. Let's just say we have a few complications, he said smoothly. I had done the initial checks as we agreed. Your ownership of the condo on Peachtree Road is clear. You are the sole owner. Everything's in order. But then I asked, feeling a bit annoyed, what the problem was. The man paused for a moment. Mrs. Reed, there is an encumbrance on your condo. I wasn't familiar with that word. I asked what it meant. It means there are certain restrictions on your property. You cannot sell, give away, or make any transactions with it until this encumbrance is cleared. What encumbrance? I pressed. Where did it come from? The cold sensation I felt earlier started to return, but now it was different, uneasy and prickly. Then the lawyer said something that changed everything for me. He spoke softly, almost casually, but it sounded like a loud explosion to my ears. Mrs. Reed, your condo is being used as collateral by a commercial bank. A mortgage agreement for a very large amount has been made against it. I was silent for a moment. I couldn't breathe properly. The air seemed stuck in my throat. Collateral mortgage. How? When? That was all I could say. Marcus answered. The agreement was signed 8 months ago. 8 months. A sudden image appeared in my mind. It was last winter. I was very ill. Pneumonia. I had a high fever for 2 weeks and was mostly delirious. Darren was at work, and Tiffany looked after me. She was so caring, bringing me broth, changing my compresses, running to the pharmacy, and fussing over some papers. Mommy, these documents came from the tax office. You need to sign them before the deadline. Don't get up. I'll bring them to you. Mommy, this is just a form for the HOA, a simple formality, just initial here. I remember her slipping the sheets under my hand. My vision was blurry, and I could barely see what was written. The words swam in front of my eyes from weakness and fever. I trusted her. She was my son's wife, part of my family. I signed without looking, just to get her to leave me alone so I could sink back into peaceful forgetfulness. My voice shook, but I quickly regained control. Is my signature on that document? Yes, Mrs. Reed. According to the papers, you personally took out the loan. The signature is notarized, and I've already asked for copies. There's reason to believe I didn't need him to finish it. I understood everything. This was not just forgery, and it was worse. It was betrayal in a moment when I was completely helpless. They hadn't only tricked me, they had taken advantage of my illness, my weakness, my trust. They watched me struggle to breathe, and at the same time, they quietly, coldly were slipping a financial trap under my pen. I asked, how much is the total? My voice now sounded like metal scraping on glass. The lawyer named the amount. It was staggering, roughly equal to the value of the condo itself. Money I would never see, even if I lived 3 more lifetimes. Something inside me shattered, that delicate thread that once connected me to my faith in people, my family, and my son. It didn't merely break, it withered away, turning to dust. Suddenly, I saw everything clearly. Their plan wasn't just to kick me out of the condo. No, it was much more sinister. They had borrowed a large sum of money, using my life, my only home, as collateral. They spent it or intended to spend it on their luxury, on a new kitchen, a dress, or whatever they desired. When it was time to settle the bills, they would simply allow the bank to take the condo. And I had already been preemptively removed, hidden away in this wilderness, so I wouldn't interfere, so I wouldn't discover what was happening until it was too late. This ruined house wasn't just a gift, it was my tomb. It was meant to be the place where I quietly disappeared while they finished eating the leftovers of my life. All the bitterness, the maternal pain, all the doubts, all of it vanished. It was swept away by a wave of cold, righteous anger. This was no longer just frustration. It was the feeling that arises when someone sees pure, untainted evil and realizes they must stop it, not for revenge, but for justice, for the memory of my husband who wanted to protect me, and for myself. Marcus, I said into the phone, my voice firm and steady. I understand. Do whatever is necessary. Gather all the documents. Prepare the legal cases. We will fight. I've already begun, Mrs. Reed. I am on your side. I know, I replied and hung up. I slowly made my way down the hill. The sun had gone down, but I felt as if I could see everything around me with extraordinary, almost inhuman clarity. Every blade of grass, every stone on the path. The world hadn't changed. I had. Before, I simply wanted to get my own revenge. Now, I knew I had to go all the way. They had awakened something in me that I hadn't known I had, and they would soon regret it. The news about the mortgage didn't overwhelm me. It hardened me, as if I had been suddenly dipped into icy water and then thrown into fire. Yet I didn't break. Instead, I became like steel. Throughout those days, I thought I was fighting to hold on to my past, my memories, and what was fair. Now I realize I was actually fighting for my future, for the simple right to live. The next few days went by in a daze, but it wasn't a fog of hopelessness. It was a cloud of intense focus. I stopped noticing the small discomforts of everyday life. The squeaking bed, the cold water, the limited food I found in old cans in the root cellar. All of that faded into the background. My body moved on its own, doing what needed to be done, while my mind stayed sharp and steady like a well-oiled machine. I cleaned a single room with the stove, scrubbing until it was spotless. I also found an old wooden table upstairs in the attic and gave it a thorough cleaning. It became my command post. Every evening, I climbed the hill, and it was no longer just a routine visit. It had become a kind of war council with Marcus Jones and myself. He acted as my eyes and ears in the city, in that life which already felt like it was behind me. Mrs. Reed, we have filed a complaint with the district attorney's office regarding mortgage fraud, he reported in his calm professional voice. I also sent an official notice to the bank, attaching medical records showing your condition during the time the agreement was made. The bank is now required to start an internal investigation. Good, I replied. What's the next step? Next, Mrs. Reed. We wait. The first shots have been fired. Just stay busy. They will expose themselves. And so I kept myself occupied. I found an old shovel in the shed and started turning over a small patch of earth in front of the house, clearing away years of weeds. The work was difficult, the soil was hard and compacted, and the roots of the thistles went deep. But with every root I pulled out, I felt myself freeing not just the earth, but my own soul. I was uprooting my past, my blind love, and my self-sacrifice. It was painful, but necessary. Then, on the fifth day after our conversation about the mortgage, the bomb dropped. That evening, as usual, I spoke with Marcus, but this time his voice sounded different. It carried a tone of restrained triumph. Well, now, Mrs. Reed, he began without any introduction. The ice is broken. That morning, a courier delivered a certified letter to your old address for your son and his wife. I imagined it. Morning time. They are drinking coffee in my kitchen, talking about what color cabinets to order. A knock on the door. The courier arrives, they sign for the letter, and casually open the thick envelope. I asked what was in the letter. An official notice from me as your legal representative. It states your full and exclusive right to the condo, warning that any attempt to conduct business with it will be legally prevented. Most importantly, it also demands that they provide an explanation within 24 hours regarding the mortgage agreement, which we insist was fraudulently signed. I remained silent, listening to his words, but that's not all, he continued. This very morning, after receiving my documents, the bank's security department responded strongly. All accounts accessible to your son, including credit cards and joint savings, were frozen while an investigation was carried out. Mr. Harrison personally supervised the process. Frozen, that's a precise word. Their world, built on my money and my broken trust, now lay under a sheet of ice. Did they try to do anything about it? I asked, already knowing the answer. Yes, the lawyer replied with a chuckle. The bank contacted me first. Your son stormed in shouting, demanding, and threatening. When they calmly explained that he wouldn't receive any money until the fraud investigation was finished, he turned pale and left the bank. An hour later, his wife arrived, furious, demanding to see the manager, shouting about consumer rights, and threatening to sue the bank. They kindly but firmly showed her the door. Their world is falling apart, Mrs. Reed, faster than they had imagined. I sat on the hilltop, the breeze teasing my hair. I looked down at my deserted town, the dark shapes of houses against the sky, and I felt no anger. Instead, I sensed things returning to their natural order. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about restoring what's rightfully theirs. Just then, my phone rang again, Darren's number. I finished talking with Marcus and answered my son's call. Mama, what did you do? His voice was unrecognizable. The gentle, slightly patronizing tone he had used with me for years was gone. In its place was a piercing, cracking scream, sharp and filled with animal panic. I stayed quiet. Are you out of your mind? We have some papers from an attorney. The bank has frozen all the accounts, everything. We don't even have enough money for groceries. Did you decide to ruin us? He was gasping with anger and fear. In the background, I could hear Tiffany's crying. Not quite tears, but loud, emotional, hysterical sobs. Do you understand what you're doing? He shouted. Tiffany's ill. She shouldn't be under so much stress. And you? You're trying to ruin our lives because of your old age sickness. I haven't done anything, Darren, I replied softly and calmly. The difference between his shouting and my quiet words seemed to completely overpower him. He fell silent. You did all this. You and your wife. What? What did we do? We gave you a gift, bought you a house, and you repay us like this. You tried to steal my condo, Darren. You took out a mortgage against it while I was desperately ill. You left me here so I wouldn't find out until the bank took my home. That's what you did. A heavy silence filled the line, just as silent as the town itself. I could only hear his uneven, exhausted breathing. He hadn't expected this. He thought I was unaware. He believed it was just an upset feeling, a temporary outburst, but it turned out to be a serious verdict. Mama, he finally rasped, sounding helpless and pleading. Mommy, this isn't right. It's a mistake, a misunderstanding. We'll explain everything. Why don't you call it all off? Withdraw those papers. We can come and talk. Come on over, I replied. Really? Hope started to appear in his voice. You'll cancel everything? No, I said calmly. Just come on over. I'm waiting for you. I ended the call. That was the moment they realized, they understood this wasn't just a childish tantrum or hurt feelings. This was war. And they also knew I was aware of their deepest secret. Now their panic would turn into despair. And when people feel despair, they often act in the most reckless ways. I turned and started walking down the hill. The night was dark, but I walked with confidence. I knew they would arrive, and I was prepared. They showed up the next day near midday. I heard them well before I saw them. The loud noise of an engine roaring loudly and inappropriately, interrupting the quiet of this quiet town, and the screech of tires right beside my house. Dust billowed up into a column, settling on the wild currant bushes. I stayed still. I sat on the same porch where they had left me a few days earlier, cleaning new potatoes with an old knife, tiny ones about the size of quail eggs found in the overgrown garden. That was my lunch. Almost immediately, the car door slammed shut. Darren was the first to jump out, looking pale and worn out, with dark circles under his eyes. He was dressed in an expensive shirt, but it was wrinkled, as if he had slept in it. Tiffany came out more slowly behind him, her face swollen and puffy. Her makeup was smudged, but she still tried to hold her head high, wearing that look of disdainful superiority that had become second nature to her. They stopped a few steps from the porch, gazing at me. I kept my head down, carefully slicing the thin skin off a potato. This repetitive, simple task kept me grounded and helped control my emotions. I wasn't part of the drama, just watching it unfold. Mama, Darren began. His voice sounded hoarse and pleading. He took a step closer, extending his arms as if to embrace me. I didn't pull away. I simply continued to look at my hands. Mommy, what is this? Why are you doing this to us? I dropped the peeled potato into a bowl of water and picked up another. I was waiting for you, I replied quietly without looking up. That straightforward answer seemed to surprise him. He had expected shouting, accusations, tears, anything but this icy, detached calm. We came to talk, he stammered. Mama, this is all just a terrible misunderstanding. We're family. Families are meant to support each other, not sue one another. He spoke carefully, clearly, but his words sank empty and false. There wasn't a bit of true feeling behind them, only fear. Fear of losing everything he believed was rightfully his. And that moment, Tiffany's patience finally broke. She stepped forward, shoving Darren aside. "Stop this nonsense," she snapped, her face twisted with anger. "Have you completely lost your mind in your old age? Did you go wild out here in the countryside? What gives you the authority to freeze our accounts? Who told you you could do that?" She was almost shouting. Her thin, unpleasant voice pierced my ears. "Do you even realize what you've done?" she added, pointing her perfectly manicured finger at me. "You're embarrassing us. We had to cancel the kitchen order. Cancel it right now. People are laughing at us and at me. I'm not supposed to be stressed out. The doctor said I shouldn't be. I'm carrying your grandchild and you're pushing us into poverty." She threw down her ace card, the pregnancy. In the past, that single word would have made me lose control and rush to meet every demand. But not this time. The cold in my chest didn't even quiver. I slowly raised my eyes to her, gazing steadily and without blinking as one examines something unfamiliar and unpleasant. My stare made her come to a sudden halt. She hesitated, fell silent, but then quickly gathered herself, and her face flushed with anger again. Darren stepped in, trying once more to play the peacemaker. "Mama, honestly, Tiffany's right. She can't be upset over this. Please, let's settle this in a calm way. I know you're hurt. We understand. We made mistakes. Maybe this house wasn't the best gift, but we will fix everything. We'll take it all back. Just call your lawyer. Tell him you've changed your mind right now. Here, take my phone." He held out his shiny smartphone to me, as if it were that simple. If I called, all their lies and betrayals would vanish, erased like writing in the sand. I placed the knife and the last potato into the bowl, wiped my hands on an old apron, and slowly stood. I was now at the same level as them. They were standing on the ground while I was a step higher on my porch. "Do you want me to call it all off?" I asked softly. "Yes, yes, Mommy." Darren quickly nodded. Tiffany watched me with defiance, her lips pressed tightly. "So I could give you my retirement savings, my condo, my entire life again?" "Mama, that's an exaggeration." Darren grimaced. "The condo belongs to both of us, and we would always have looked after you." "Like you cared for me when I was ill?" I inquired, my voice even quieter. But in the silence that followed, it sounded deafening. They froze in place. I looked over at Tiffany. She instinctively took a small step backward. "I remember everything, Tiff," I said, using the name she liked for the first time in years. "I remember you sitting by my bedside. I remember your gentle hands and the papers you quietly slid to me, claiming they were for the tax office or the HOA. Just a formality." Tiffany's face turned pale as a sheet. All her spite, her rage, her confidence, it all seemed to wash away like bad makeup in the rain. Only pure animal fear was left. Darren looked back and forth between me and his wife, clearly confused. "Mama, what are you talking about?" I glanced again at my son. There was fear in his eyes, but also confusion. Perhaps he truly didn't know all the details. Maybe she had even deceived him. Or maybe he preferred not to face the truth. It no longer mattered. He was an accomplice. I continued, clearly emphasizing each word. "I'm talking about the mortgage, Darren. The large mortgage you took out at the bank 8 months ago, using my condo as collateral and my signature, signed when I was delirious. Did you think I would never discover? Did you believe I would quietly fade away in this shabby place while the bank simply takes my home to cover your debts?" That punch struck deep. It was plain to see in how Darren staggered, as if struck in the stomach. He gazed at Tiffany with horror and a new bitter awareness. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, at her expensive shoes now stained with dirt from the country. All their schemes and manipulations crumbled into nothing. They stood before me exposed, their greed and lies laid bare. The masks had been torn away, the act was finished. "So, Darren," I said calmly, "do you still want me to call the lawyer?" He couldn't speak. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish stranded on the shore. Tiffany shrank into her shoulders, transforming from a predator into a cornered animal. The pause stretched long and heavy. In that quiet moment, the last of my maternal love for him vanished. It died and was buried right there next to the battered porch. "Leave," I said. It wasn't a demand or a plea, just a simple statement of fact, like saying it's raining or night has fallen. They turned silently, not meeting each other's eyes like puppets whose strings had been cut, and walked slowly to their shiny, expensive car. The engine started up, not with a loud roar, but in a tired, weary tone. The car moved away gradually, almost uncertainly, down the dusty road. I stayed alone on the porch. Beside me, a bowl of clean potatoes sat waiting. My lunch, my new beginning, and the air around me felt wonderfully fresh. After they drove off, silence settled, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the heavy, oppressive silence of the first day, but a calm, dignified quietness. I boiled my potatoes on the stove. They tasted like the most delicious food in the world. I ate slowly, sitting at my clean table, and looked out the window, which I had finally managed to unboard and wash. Beyond it was my overgrown yard, and among the weeds I saw a few surviving peony bushes. Their dark red, tight buds were just about to open. I thought that was the end, that they, crushed and exposed, would leave me alone and try to clean up the mess they had made. But I underestimated them once more. I forgot that a cornered animal doesn't seek forgiveness. It looks for one last chance to strike. About a week went by. During that time, I happened to meet my only neighbor, or rather, he came to me. One morning, I was pulling a bucket of water from the well when I heard a calm, gentle voice behind my back. "Here, neighbor, let me help you. This windless heat isn't a woman's job," he said. I turned around. Standing before me was a tall, slender, elderly man with a gray beard and strikingly clear blue eyes. With a gentle, steady motion, he finished turning the windmill, then reached for the bucket, placing it on the ground. "Curtis Baker," he introduced himself, offering a broad, calloused hand. "I live in that house over there, 2 properties down. I'm among the last of the old-timers in this town." "Evelyn Reed," I replied, shaking his firm grip. "That's how we first met." Curtis, or Uncle Kurt, as he asked me to call him, was a former county commissioner, an old-fashioned man, quiet but wise and steady. He never asked how I came to be here. He simply saw. He saw the expensive car that brought me and left, and he saw me alone, trying to make this abandoned house livable. Without a word, he understood everything and began helping me. One day, he'd bring a few dry logs. Another time, he shared milk from his goat. Sometimes, he would come by in the evening to sit on the porch and talk about the weather or the prospects of a good harvest. His quiet presence gave me great comfort. When he was near, I didn't feel alone. I felt safe. And then, the final confrontation began. One morning, as I was watering my future pays, I heard the sound of engines. Not just one, but several. A whole convoy was approaching my town. 3 passenger cars stopped at my house, and people started to get out. I recognized some of them. My cousin, Aunt Carol from Raleigh, North Carolina, with her husband. My late husband's nephew, Darnell, with his wife. A few other distant relatives I had only seen at funerals and weddings. And leading the group, like 2 generals commanding their army, were Darren and Tiffany. Darren looked even worse than the last time, thinner, with a twitching eyelid. Tiffany, however, had changed completely. She was dressed in a simple dark dress, no makeup. Her hair was pulled back into a modest bun. A look of universal sorrow rested on her face. She held Darren's arm gently, offering support as if he might fall at any moment. It was a poignant scene, the unfortunate son and his devoted, suffering wife. They arranged the family members in a semicircle, as if for a solemn event, and Darren, encouraged by Tiffany's quiet whisper, began to speak. His voice trembled, but it was no longer from panic. It was a rehearsed display of grief. "Dear ones, Aunt Carol, Darnell, thank you for coming," he started, his gaze sweeping over everyone with a tragic expression. "We have called you because a tragedy has struck our family, a terrible tragedy." He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The relatives looked at me with confusion and sympathy. "Our mother, Evelyn Reed," Darren continued with emotion, "she's unwell. After her bout with pneumonia, she began to experience mental issues. She forgets things, gets confused. She's imagining conspiracies, inventing mortgages. She doesn't even recognize us anymore." He hesitated before adding softly, "She accuses us of terrible things. I stood there, holding the watering can, listening to what felt like a farce. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had decided to declare me insane so they could take everything from me, turning their lies into what they claimed was just a result of my disturbed mind. They wanted to get her help, Tiffany softly explained, her voice gentle and pure as an angel's while she dried her eyes with the corner of a tissue. We searched for the best doctors, the ideal clinic, but she ran away. She found an abandoned house somewhere and has been hiding there ever since. She refused all offers of help, even blocked her account, so we couldn't pay for her treatment. She's a danger to herself. We fear she might do something harmful to herself, Aunt Carol said anxiously, a kind woman whose face showed shock and concern. Evie, dear, what is going on? Come back to the city. You need to be in a hospital to get help. They looked at me as if I were a dangerous maniac, their expressions a mixture of pity, fear, and something like disgust. I saw the certainty in their eyes. Darren and Tiffany's plan was remarkably simple and convincing. Who would believe that a lonely elderly woman living in a rundown house could pose a threat against a young, respectable son and his pregnant wife who were so concerned for her? I stayed quiet. What could I say? Any words or protests from me would only be seen as signs of illness. See, they interpreted any reaction, any sign of anger or defense, as aggression or inappropriate behavior. Just when it felt like I had lost this dirty final battle, I heard the gentle sound of a gate opening behind me. A voice asked, "May I be nosy?" Everyone turned around. Uncle Kurt was standing on the path. He wore his usual work clothes but stood tall and commanding like a general. His bright blue eyes scanned everyone there, paused on Darren and Tiffany, and finally settled on me. "And you, excuse me, who are you?" Tiffany asked harshly, glancing him over. "Me? I'm just a neighbor," he replied calmly, Curtis Baker. "And who are you kind folks who came here to frighten this woman with a whole crowd?" "We are her relatives," Darren snapped angrily. "We've come to help her. She's not mentally stable." Uncle Kurt slowly approached and stood beside me. He wasn't looking directly at me, but I felt the strength of his steady presence. "Not mentally stable, you say?" He narrowed his eyes at Darren. "That's strange. I have been speaking with Evelyn Reed for a week now, and I see a woman who is completely sane, clear-minded, and very strong. A woman her own son brought out on her birthday and then threw into this shack like worthless trash. I saw it myself," the relatives whispered. Aunt Carol looked at Darren with doubt. "And I also see a woman," Uncle Kurt continued, his voice growing more certain, "who is transforming this shack into a home all on her own, without anyone's help. She lit the stove, tidied up, and is working the garden. Is that how truly troubled people behave? To me, that's how those who have lost everything act, but they could never take the most vital thing, the will to go on." He moved a step closer to the group. "And as for you two young people," he turned his attention to Tiffany, "you seem odd to me. You arrived in an expensive car, dressed to impress, yet you claim your mother has cut off all your money. How did you get here with your last bit of cash? And you don't look like grieving children. You seem more like con artists trying to manipulate an older woman into giving you her final savings. Instead of threats, you're using tears and lies." He said these words loudly and clearly, and they hit home. The relatives who had come to show sympathy for Darren now looked at him and Tiffany with suspicion. Their carefully planned act was falling apart right before their eyes. Aunt Carol approached me. "Evie, is it true he threw you out?" I nodded softly, and that was enough. All their lies burst like a soap bubble. The relatives began to whisper and cast angry, judging glances at Darren and Tiffany. Darnell, the nephew, a large man, approached Darren. "What are you doing, you scoundrel?" he growled. "Deciding to take your own mother to her grave?" Darren stepped back. Tiffany reached for his arm and pulled him toward the car. Their public trial had now become their public shame. They hurried away, running beneath the scornful stares of the very people who had been their judges. One by one, the cars turned around and drove off. At last, only Uncle Kurt and I remained on the road. I turned to him and quietly said, "Yes, thank you." He simply smiled into his gray beard. "No need to thank me, neighbor. Telling the truth isn't just helpful, it's a duty." I watched the dust from their cars settle on the road, and I understood this was the end, the very last. They hadn't lost in court or at the bank. They had lost here on this land in front of ordinary people. And this defeat was more damaging to them than any financial crisis. It was a total moral collapse, complete and irreversible. The dust on the road settled, and with it, the dust of my past life quieted as well. From that day when my relatives came to witness my shame, only for it to become my son's shame, I never heard from them again. Marcus Jones, my trusted lawyer, saw the case through to the end. The bank acknowledged that the mortgage agreement was fraudulent, especially after several relatives agreed to testify about Darren and Tiffany's unusual behavior and their attempt to declare me incompetent. All charges against me were dropped. I didn't bother to find out what happened to them afterward. I only know they faced criminal charges for fraud and had to deal with the consequences of their actions on their own, without my help, my money, or my forgiveness. Their world, built on lies, collapsed, burying them under its ruins. And my life was just beginning at 63. The first thing I did after settling all the legal matters was to sell the condo on Peachtree Road without any regrets. I visited it one last time to collect my most cherished belongings, the photo album, a few books, and Paul's old armchair. Walking through the empty, echoing rooms, I felt a wave of nostalgia. This place was no longer my home. It had become just an empty property, cold and unfamiliar. My true home was here now, in this quiet, abandoned town. The money from the sale, along with the funds in my hidden savings account, I invested in steady, reliable assets, even if they didn't promise great profits, as Marcus had suggested. This brought me the most important thing: certainty. The certainty that I would never have to rely on anyone again, that I could afford my own treatment if needed, buy firewood in winter, or get a new roof for my house. I began to build, not literally, of course. I hired a team from the nearby county seat. Two clever, serious minded men. They replaced my roof, put in new wooden windows, built a new stove, an authentic old fashioned one with a hearth, and crafted a new strong porch that no longer squeaked or wobbled. I didn't supervise them. I worked beside them, doing tasks like fetching supplies, painting, and cleaning. At first, they looked at me with surprise, but then with respect. "Evelyn, you're something else." Their foreman, Mitch, said to me, "You've got a backbone most men don't have." I just smiled. I hadn't realized I had a backbone. For most of my life, I believed I was soft and flexible. It turned out that a core of strength had been inside me all along. It simply hadn't been able to show. The house changed completely before my eyes. From a dark, gloomy shack, it became a warm, bright cabin. I painted the walls myself, hung simple gingham curtains with tiny floral patterns on the windows, placed Paul's armchair in the corner, arranged my books on the shelves, and gradually the house began to come alive. It started to breathe. In the spring, I took on the garden. Uncle Kurt helped me remove the old, diseased trees and laid out a vegetable patch. For the first time in my life, I planted potatoes, carrots, and onions by myself, caring for each sprout as if it were a small child. And the soil, sensing my attention, responded with remarkable generosity. The peonies, which I first saw that day, grew into a large, lush bush and bloomed so beautifully that I was awestruck. I remembered how my grandmother had taught me to embroider when I was a child. I found the hoops in the old chest, bought thread and canvas in town, and in the evenings, sitting by the warm stove, I began to stitch simple patterns: flowers, birds, and decorative ornaments. It turned out that my fingers still remembered how to do it. This quiet work was calming. It helped me organize my thoughts. I no longer spoke to Paul's photograph. I felt that he was just nearby, and I believed he would have been proud of me. Uncle Kurt and I became genuine friends. We didn't pry into each other's inner lives, but we understood each other perfectly without words. In the evenings, he often stopped by for tea made from the herbs we gathered together in the woods. We sat on my new porch, drank from old earthenware cups, and simply watched the sunset. That silence carried more meaning than all the conversations I had had over the past 10 years. Sometimes I thought about my son, but it no longer brought pain or resentment. Instead, I felt compassion, as one might for a stranger who's lost. I raised him, gave him everything I could, but I couldn't instill in him what he lacked. a conscience. And that was not my fault. It was his choice. I gently let him go, mentally severing the last thread that still connected me to him. He was no longer my duty, my pain, my responsibility. He was simply a man who had once been my son. I am now 65 years old. I sit on my porch, holding a cup of hot herbal tea I made from herbs grown in my own yard. The sun is setting behind the trees, casting beautiful colors across the sky. The scent of mown grass and flowers drifts through the air. Inside, the firewood crackles softly in the stove. A stray kitten I name Vasaya purrs contentedly on my lap. I glance at my hands. They are rough from working in the garden. My nails are no longer perfectly polished like they used to be, but these hands belong to a person who is alive, a person who is quietly building a life of her own. Sometimes I think I should feel thankful to Darren and Tiffany. If it hadn't been for their cruelty, I would still be living my days in the shadows of someone else's life. I wouldn't have discovered what I am truly capable of. I would have never met Uncle Kurt, never seen these beautiful flowers bloom. I wouldn't have tasted water from my own well. They wanted to bury me, but instead they gave me life, a true, genuine life. I take a sip of the tea. It's tangy, fragrant, and full of life. I believe that dignity is not something others bestow upon you. It is not about their respect or approval. Dignity comes from within. It's something you regain when facing fear, resentment, or despair. It's what you clutch tightly when it feels like all is lost, a quiet, hard won victory. That's real happiness and genuine freedom. Did you like my story? If you listened until the end, please leave a number one in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I have many other life stories like this on my channel, so be sure to subscribe and take a look. I've added 2 new stories on the screen that everyone loves. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one. With love.